Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Yashodanandana Prajajanaranja Yashodanandana Prajajanaranja Yashodanandana Prajajanaranja Jamunatira Jaya Radha Punjabi Jaya Punjabi Jaya Radha Punjabi Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjan Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjan Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi I am Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajikacharya Tabashara Srimad Abhay Chanalavinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Shri Guru Parampara Ki Tantra Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Nitai Gaur Premanandi. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Leela Amrita. I have done my part. July of 1977 was special for pious Hindus, and the people of Vrindavan spent extra time in reading scriptures and visiting holy places. So by the end of July, when the trees and bushes were freshening with green leaves, pilgrims came in crowds to Vrindavan and to the Krishna Balaram Mandir. Despite the mud and the rain, many of the people were in a jubilant mood, relieved from the oppressive heat and anticipating Julan Yatra, the swing festival of Radha Krishna. Julan Yatra was Vrindavan's biggest festival and would occur in mid-August this year. The local newspapers were giving reports on Srila Prabhupada's health, and a genuine concern for his well-being prevailed throughout Vrindavan and surrounding villages. Therefore, because of the festival season, as well as out of concern for Srila Prabhupada, many people were coming to the Krishna Balaram Mandir. Those who came around 9 a.m. got to see Srila Prabhupada when he went for his morning darshan of the deities. Srila Prabhupada still had no appetite and had scarcely eaten during the past 6 weeks. He was no longer regular in his times for sleeping, taking massage, or sitting up and translating, feeling himself to be at a critical period. He had given permission for devotees all over ISKCON to recite a simple prayer. My dear Lord Krishna, if you desire, please cure Srila Prabhupada. He would regularly go before the deities each morning, wearing his dark sunglasses and sitting erect in the rocking chair. He would hold his palms together in a gesture of prayer, while two men, one in front and one behind, carefully carried the rocker from Prabhupada's room into the temple room. They would set the chair down first before the deities of Gauranitai, then before Krishna Balaram, and then before Radhashyama Sundara. Then they would carry him to a central spot in the courtyard under the tamal tree and set his chair down on the black and white checkered marble floor. Srila Prabhupada would sit facing Krishna and Balaram, and the devotees would sit down around him and begin a kirtan. As the kirtan began, two Gurukul boys would rise and come in front of him, where they would begin dancing with arms upraised, their cotton chadars swinging back and forth. Prabhupada would usually not speak or even smile, but after a few minutes would give his garlands to a devotee who would place them around the necks of the dancers. Soon two other young boys would come forward, and the first boys would garland them with the garlands they had received from Srila Prabhupada and sit down. For half an hour the dancing and singing continued. Guests to the temple would gather, many of them offering money at Srila Prabhupada's feet, which rested on an embroidered silk cushion. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yeah.
Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 17, The Descent of the River Ganges, Text 4. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, it's a prose verse, so I'll read it myself. Tato neka sahasrakoti vimana nika sankula deva yanenavata antindu mandalam avarya brahmasadane nipatati. Please repeat. Tata. After purifying the 7 planets of the 7 great sages, Aneka, many, Sahasra, thousands, Koti, of millions, Vimana Anika, with contingents of airplanes, Sankula, congested, Devayanena, by the spaceways of the demigods, Avataranti, descending, Hindu Mandalam, the moon planet, Avarya, inundated, Brahmasadane, to the abode of Lord Brahma, atop Sumeru Parvat, Nipatati, falls down. Translation. After purifying the 7 planets near Dhruvaloka, the pole star, the Ganges water is carried through the spaceways of the demigods in billions of celestial airplanes. Then it inundates the moon, Chandraloka, and finally reaches Lord Brahma's abode atop Mount Meru. Please repeat. After purifying the 7 planets near Dhruvaloka, the pole star, the Ganges water is carried through the spaceways of the demigods in billions of celestial airplanes. Then it inundates the moon, Chandraloka, and finally reaches Lord Brahma's abode atop Mount Meru. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. We should always remember that the Ganges River comes from the causal ocean, beyond the covering of the universe. After the water of the causal ocean leaks through the hole created by Lord Vamanadev, it flows down to Dhruvaloka, the pole star, and then to the 7 planets beneath Dhruvaloka. Then it is carried to the moon by innumerable celestial airplanes, and then it falls to the top of Mount Meru, which is known as Sumeru Parvat. In this way, the water of the Ganges finally reaches the lower planets and the peaks of the Himalayas, and from there it flows through Hardwar and throughout the plains of India, purifying the entire land. How the Ganges water reaches the various planets from the top of the universe is explained herein. Celestial airplanes carry the water from the planets of the sages to other planets. So-called advanced scientists of the modern age are trying to go to the higher planets, but at the same time they are experiencing a power shortage on Earth. If they were actually capable scientists, they could personally go by airplane to other planets, but this they are unable to do. Having now given up their moon excursions, they are attempting to go to other planets, but without success. Amagyanatimrandasya Garanjana Shalakaya Chakshurunalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapatam Yena Bhutale Swayamurpadamayam Dadati Swapatantigam Pandeham Shri Guru Shri Padakalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahaganavaganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sarvaitam Savadutam Varijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shiva Shakan Vitam Scha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Anshakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhabhyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnave Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, one little detail of this purport and many of the previous purports. It's described that having the Ganges having come from the planets of the 7 sages, and then coming to Dhruvaloka, and then to the then comes to Mount Meru, which is it's described as the township of Lord Brahma. It's called Brahmapuri. But actually, Lord Brahma's Satyaloka, Brahmaloka, is the highest planet realm of the material of this particular material universe. So it seems that Lord Brahma has like a a residence amongst the demigods on top of Mount Meru. So it's interesting. Like in the beginning of the 10th canto, the demigods approach Lord Brahma, and then he takes the demigods to the ocean of the milk, to the shore of the milk ocean. So Lord Brahma is, he has his, he's the engineer of the universe. But he is, you could say, his second engineer is Lord Indra. So he's constantly there. He's available for the demigods. So it seems that he has it's described earlier in the previous chapter, that he has a township called Brahmapuri. So that he's, and in this way we can also understand that the way that the different levels of the universe are described doesn't mean those who reside in the higher planets, they can come to any of the lower regions. For whatever reason they choose, Lord Brahma he's the head of our sampradaya. He's also the grandfather of all of the living entities in this universe. So he comes, like throughout the Bhagavatam we read that he comes, for example, at the beginning of the 5th canto, he came to speak to Maharaj Priyavrata when Maharaj Priyavrata was reluctant to enter household life. So he's constantly interacting with the different administrators of the universal affairs. And similarly, when we sometimes read statements which appear contradictory, it's because we have a tendency to just think of the universe in terms of realms and planets, but we're forgetting it. So it's like the reason those realms and planets exist is to fulfill the desires of living entities, and one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent, of desire of living entities is to interact with other living entities. So there's constant toing and froing. As we know, Lord Narada Muni and Lord Shiva and many of the great sages, from time to time, they come even to this planet, especially when there's an incarnation of Lord Vishnu on the planet, then they come to reciprocate with the worship or devotion, or sometimes they come to protect or give instruction. So the whole universe is like populated by highly elevated jivas who have the ability to travel at will throughout the universe, and also have the ability to have mystic powers. So we should always remember this, that it's, even though there are certain attempts to represent the universe in 3 dimensions, or even more dimensions through computer graphics, but all of those attempts are not going to be able to come close to the actual opulent and wonderful nature of the universe, which is, it's like a constant interaction between the Lord's devotees. Sometimes, of course, there's also friction between some of those devotees, and there's also friction with the asuras and other living entities who don't recognize the supremacy of the Supreme Lord. So it's until we become pure devotees ourselves, then there'll always be a tendency to apply our material reasoning to Shastra. So we have to accept that is there. So therefore we should, remembering personalities, I find, is very, very helpful. I listened to a class by His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Swami actually on the previous chapter, and he was also talking about Mount Meru. He was talking about that banyan tree, Shatavalsha, which is on top of Mount Meru, and all of the different oceans come flowing down into Jambudweep, the oceans of honey and milk and molasses and other substances come flowing down. So he was just meditating on how wonderful it is, how wonderful the opulence of the universe is. And also he was remembering an occasion where Srila Prabhupada was walking with his devotees, actually at Bhaktivedanta Manor, and next to one of the ponds. I think there used to be more than one pond at Bhaktivedanta Manor. And there was a frog sitting on the banks of the pond, and when the devotees approached, then the frog jumped into the water, and you could see the bubbles coming up to the surface. So Srila Prabhupada said, "Oh, look at the mystic potency of this frog, that it can breathe on the land, and it can also breathe in the water." And one devotee offered some kind of scientific explanation about how that was possible. But Srila Prabhupada, I don't know if I can remember the example that Srila Prabhupada gave now. Anyway, the point that Srila Prabhupada made was that everything is mystical. Everything is a manifestation of Krishna's mystic potency, and Krishna derives pleasure from creating mystical phenomena for the pleasure of his devotees to relish. Srila Prabhupada was setting that example that when he saw the activities of different species of living entities, including, then he would be enjoying remembering that this is Krishna's mystic power, that Krishna has created this phenomena, created this living entity with mystic power. He gives the example of how it's mystical that the fingernail grows out of the finger. I mean, I've got a good realization that even though about 20 years ago, I got some fungal infection in my fingernails, but even though it's been there for 20 years, still they're growing. Like, even though it's like, even though there's like a major sort of disease has got in there, but still they're growing. It's quite amazing. And as more and more now, when scientists are looking at human anatomy and physiology, then they're discovering so many complex interactions between different cells in the body. And they're not coming close to understanding any of them. All they can do is just describe them and enlighten. And by using very complex language, they give us the illusion that they actually understand what's happening, but actually they just don't know. They don't know what is the energy, what is the source of the information that enables different cells in the body to interact with each other. So here Srila Prabhupada says, so-called advanced scientists of the modern age are trying to go to the higher planets, but at the same time they are experiencing a power shortage on Earth. So this was written like in around about 1976 or 76, early 76. So even at that time, there was power shortages. I remember when I was 14 or 15 years old, there were power cuts. I remember having to do my school homework with a candle. And that was due to actually political unrest in the country. It was due to the government announcing that they were going to be closing a lot of the coal mines, and that brought about a very angry reaction from the miners' unions, trade unions. So they went on strike, and very quickly there wasn't enough power for everybody to be able to have their lights on. So even, and that's the case now, it's like, it's not really, there is actually enough power on the planet. There's enough power in the oceans, in the wind. More and more scientists are now learning how to channel power from the elements into electricity without depleting the stocks of the planet. So that's always been there. But so-called advanced scientists of the modern age are trying to go to higher planets. Yeah, so basically they're trying to attain a higher standard of living without the adhikar, without the karma. So whether they're trying to go to Mars or even actually I read a couple of days ago that even some scientists are talking about populating other galaxies now. So whatever they're talking about, and then they're also, you could say that they're trying to go to higher planets by their medical science, in the sense of trying to enable people to live longer, which is an opulence of another planet. Although actually, and by doing, but at the same time, they're experiencing power shortages. So because it's not just the scientists and the politicians and the workers, all of us, because we've neglected to follow the directions given in the Srimad Bhagavatam, other Puranas, other Vedic literature, then we've been born in a society according to our karma that doesn't have faith in that literature. So it's like, in the Bible it says, as you sow, so you shall reap. So we've sown the desire of ignoring the Shastra, and we're reaping birth in a society where no one's interested in Shastra. When no one's interested in Shastra, but because they're receiving the rewards of their previous insubordination and ignorance, but they haven't lost that intrinsic desire to enjoy, which is the nature of the jiva. Just as we've been reading a lot recently from chapter 6, that when the yogi attains samadhi, then the innate bliss becomes manifest. So that innate bliss is constantly there in all jivas. And the more those jivas become separated from the means to attain that bliss, then the more frustration is there. So therefore they have to create more and more elaborate and intricate and complex means to try to substitute that natural spiritual bliss with some kind of material enjoyment. And in doing so, and because they're not following the Vedic injunctions, then they're just incurring more and more ugra karma, more and more very entangling karmic reactions, so that they're taking birth in more and more atheistic, more and more sinful families, until it comes to the point, as we're experiencing now, that they exhaust all of the resources of the planet that they live on. Actually, another thing Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj mentioned was that a few years ago, devotees at New Vrajadam in Hungary, several of the devotees who work on the eco project there actually have got professional ecologists and environmental engineers, and they did some research, and the basis of their research was to ascertain what would happen if if everyone on planet Earth had the same level of consumption as the average citizen of the United States of America. So if everyone on the planet had the same level of consumption as the average citizen in the United States of America, it would take 6 planet Earths to provide the necessary resources. So that's why the Americans are the first ones who want to go to Mars, because they know that there's not enough resources on this planet to satisfy them. And previously, people in power could just exploit the ignorant masses and get them to do all of the hard work, well, first of all, they got the people in their own country to do all the hard work, and if they didn't agree, they had a war or something to rally them around, whatever. But then after they ran out of resources in their own country, then they have to create wars in other countries so they can gain power in other countries and exploit the resources in those countries. And then after some time, it causes just so much unrest on the whole planet that they've got no more facility to be able to satisfy themselves. So now they're investing all of their money in populating other planets, or in creating some kind of artificial intelligence whereby they can manipulate, even so-called educated people can be manipulated. They've tried to manipulate all of the uneducated people, and there's none of them left. So now they have to manipulate the educated people. But anyway, so Srila Prabhupada says they are attempting to go to other planets, but without success. Yeah, so they can succeed superficially. They can superficially succeed, but Srila Prabhupada said that that they never went to the moon planet. They may have gone to some rock, or whatever. Wherever they went, they did not have access to the opulence of Chandraloka, which is the moon. And because we also have accepted the atheistic education given by these demoniac dictators, then we also have lost access to the opulence of our own planet, planet Earth. We've lost the ability to reap the rich resources of this planet, and we've become dependent on the artificial opulence offered by atheistic autocrats. When I say we, I don't mean just ISKCON or just devotees here at Karuna Bhavan. I mean everyone that I know. I don't know anybody who hasn't neglected their spiritual life and has therefore had to substitute their spiritual happiness with dependence on those leaders who've rejected the Vedic literature, or who've rejected not just the Vedic literature, but rejected all scriptural literature, all literature coming from God. So are there any questions or comments? Ashish Prabhu.
A question. Is this the thing that our planet Earth does not have sufficient resources to feed the close to 8 billion people? Like when you mentioned that the average amount an American consumes, if everyone consumes that same average amount, planet Earth cannot feed everyone. So does it mean what dietary is included in it? Because I was thinking that in terms of resources to feed everyone, there's ample amount of resources.
It's not just food. It's because if all of the land that was actually used for food, then if all of the land on the planet was used for growing food in a sustainable way, then certainly there'd be enough food for everybody to have a very high standard of living. Actually, there's another piece of research that was actually, it's Holiness Shiva Ramaswamy Maharaj mentioned in his talk on Varnashram a couple of weeks ago, that the standard of living of devotees living in New Vrajadam is higher than the standard of living of the average person in Germany, and they have the highest GDP in Europe. If it's based on actually their standard of living in terms of their health, in terms of their education, their clean water, clean air. So, yeah, there's enough resources on the planet to feed everyone and to feed them very opulently and to give them like clean air, top-class education, and a very rich emotional life, and eventually it's like a spiritual aspiration. That's definitely there. It's there on all of the planets. But as long as we're not learning the science of utilizing nature's gifts in the way that they're described in the Vedic literature. Vedic literature doesn't just mean the books. It means also the Upavedas and the which describe the different sciences like of agriculture and how to make tools from metals, how to use what are the qualities of different gemstones, like medical science, and then also artistic activities, so that we can become nourished physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually by utilizing the gifts of the earth without the need for taking more than the earth can give. So because we haven't lost them completely, but because we've neglected those arts, those Vedic arts, then we have to substitute the happiness we would have derived with artificial happiness, which demands vast exploitation of the resources on the planet. We know there's the story of what's that emperor called? Ashoka. Who was Ashoka's minister? Was it? Sorry? No. What? It might have been Chanakya Pandit. But anyway, he lived in a cottage. He was like the prime minister of the biggest empire on the planet, but he just lived in a little cottage. And he refused to accept any opulence whatsoever, because he didn't want to be like to be able to be manipulated by anyone. Similarly, like the Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami, they were the richest, next to the Nawab, they were the richest citizens in the whole of Bengal. But when they gave up their positions and went to live in Vrindavan, even though they still had vast political influence, like hundreds of very powerful people knew them in Vrindavan, and they were able to attract vast investment into the rebuilding Vrindavan, and re-establishing the culture of Krishna consciousness at that time. But they didn't accept anything for themselves whatsoever. But as we know, they were like blissful all the time. So yeah, there's no shortage of resources for a very opulent lifestyle. But opulent means to understand our relationship with the other living entities on this planet, and also our relationship with the demigods. So it's described in the Bhagavad Gita by cooperation between men and demigods. Prosperity will reign for all. But those who do not offer in return what they receive from the demigods are considered thieves. Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, a thief can never be happy. So, and Srila Prabhupada says by performance of yagya, the demigods will be satisfied. Srila Prabhupada says the yagya in the age of Kali is Sankirtan yagya. That's so, and there's one purport in the fourth canto. Srila Prabhupada says that we don't need to. Oh no, it's not. Sorry, it's in the 10th canto. It's when Krishna says to the cowherd boys, "Look at these trees. They're just like great saintly persons because then they're always thinking about the welfare of others. They give a wealth in the form of fruits, flowers, leaves, bark, fuel, medicine. So that we should also do that. We should also devote our lives to helping others by our mind, words, and our whole life." And in the purport to that verse, Srila Prabhupada says this doesn't mean that we should worship trees. I mean, because he says, Krishna says, just look at these trees. They're like saintly persons who offer everything. They offer their whole life. So if we could think, oh yeah, therefore we should worship nature, we should worship trees. Srila Prabhupada says, no, in Kali Yuga, the form of worship, the way you worship all living entities is by pleasing Krishna by the form of Sankirtan, hearing and chanting the holy name of Krishna. No other form of worship is necessary. So, and in that way, the demigods are pleased, and they bestow their opulence on human society. But how can human society receive that opulence? It's just like we've been given the Srimad Bhagavatam, we've been given the holy name, we've been given prasadam, but we also need to learn how to honor the prasadam, how to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, how to chant the holy name. Non-devotees don't know how to reap the benefits of those benedictions. So similarly, to receive the benedictions from the demigods, we need to understand how to reap those benefits. And that's something that perhaps we've neglected in ISKCON, although Srila Prabhupada definitely didn't neglect it himself. That's why he wanted us to establish farming communities, so we could actually learn how to reap the rewards that the demigods are giving us. Or you could even say that Lord Brahma gave us right in the beginning by creating this planet, by creating Jambudvip. We're reading now about all of the opulence of Jambudvip. but we can perceive virtually none of that opulence because we've like cluttered our brains with artificial means to try to gain enjoyment and satisfaction and sustenance. So, yeah, yeah, definitely there's enough land to produce not just all the food we need, but all the medicine we need, all of the buildings that we need, all of the schools, all of the universities, all of the societies and cultures, all of the art, all of the music that we need, all of the musical instruments, everything's there. There's no need to create any new synthetic chemicals or any new like political systems. Everything is described in the Vedas, and Srila Prabhupada has given us that knowledge in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam, in his purports. So in his purports, here's one purport, so-called advanced scientists of the modern age are trying to go to the higher planets, but at the same time they're experiencing a power shortage on Earth, so that's now. We have a power shortage, undoubtedly. The only way we can get the power that we need to sustain the society we've created due to our neglect of the Vedas is to really exploit the resources of the planet to such a degree that the planet can no longer function in the way it was designed to function. And now even politicians are realizing that that's what's happened. So they're not really interested in trying to redress the balance. They just want to, go to Mars or some other planet, or create a completely synthetic bubble somewhere on this planet using alternative intelligence and surveillance systems to keep people at bay, really. So we need to have faith that by doing the right thing, and the most important right thing is to practice Bhakti Yoga. Srila Prabhupada said one devotee, it was Guru Das, no, it might have been Brahmananda. Actually, it was either Brahmananda or Guru Das. They were with Prabhupada on a train, and the train stopped in a station in Bengal, and the people were selling chickens on the station platform, and one person came with their young son to buy a chicken. And he bought the chicken, and then the man just strangled the chicken at that moment. And the chicken was screaming, and the child was terrified. And the Guru Dasa Brahmananda said, "Did you see that, Srila Prabhupada?" Srila Prabhupada said, "Yes. And if we do not perform Bhakti Yoga devotional service, we will also become cruel. And we will inherit a hellish civilization." So Srila Prabhupada was basically saying that this is the natural cruelty, extreme cruelty, to the degree that you don't care that you're terrorizing your own son and causing suffering to other living entities. That is a natural consequence of not engaging in Bhakti Yoga, not chanting Hare Krishna, or not chanting the name of God, not following the laws of God, not serving the devotees of God. So it's easy to point the finger at President Trump or the president of North Korea or anyone else who we consider to be responsible for polluting the planet. But actually, we've got the karma of these leaders because it was our karma to be born on the planet at this time. Whether it's for our own personal security and happiness, or whether it's for the happiness of others, or whether we're caring about the planet or other living entities, or the next generation, we need to apply the principles of Srimad Bhagavatam, all of the principles. And all of the principles means the ones that Srila Prabhupada brings out in his purports. So, there are many purports where he brings up these issues. John?
So you know where the Sahara Desert is?
Sorry?
You know the Sahara Desert?
Yeah.
Has that always been a desert?
No. Definitely not. It's interesting. Just last night I was looking at the lost ancient civilizations of Africa. There's no river like the Nile anywhere else in the world. It's just like the Nile is actually a canal that cuts through the whole of Sudan and Egypt, and actually is meant to irrigate that whole area. The most at the time, Egypt was the most powerful civilization on the planet. Do you think it would choose to live in a desert for 3,000 years? No. If you look at the the archaeological finds of Egypt, they were very, very rich in every aspect of life, and particularly in agricultural produce. So undoubtedly, and also there were other civilizations in what is now the Sahara. The Sahara's increased probably by 30 or 40% in our own lifetime. So you can imagine how much it's like if you go back thousands of years. You can imagine that whole area was actually fertile. And that's also, I was thinking that it's only taken us 100 years to wipe out more than half the species on the planet, and to bring the planet to a point where many very erudite scientists think that it's gone beyond the point of no return now. So similarly, since it's Kali Yuga, and that in the past we've read about certain demons and not Rakshasas and Daityas and Danavas who were also exploiting left, right, and center, that they could also exploit higher planets as well, and other planets, at least in our realm. So it's not surprising that what we hear from the fifth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam doesn't bear much relationship to what we see on the planet now. It's not just because we don't have the necessary vision to see a different dimension, but it's also just because, just as we've destroyed half the planet in the last 100 years, then persons with the same exploitative mentality who had the ability to go to other realms also destroyed those realms as well. However, it is possible to repopulate deserts, and it is possible to regenerate them and make them fertile again. And one of the simplest way to do so is to take cows there, to take cows to deserts. And actually some devotees started a campaign about 10 years ago called the Sri Surabhi campaign, and it's actually called Turning Deserts into Forests. So it is possible. Anyway, it's a very, very big topic. It's only as Shivaram Swami Maharaj said, it's exceptionally complex. And therefore, it's best that we leave it to those who are expert in the field, or who are like our community leaders or our institutional leaders, to make the decisions about how to progress in relationship to environmental issues. But what we can do is we can practice bhakti yoga, but also we can practice the directions given in the end of the 7th canto, which is called Instructions for Civilized Human Beings, which just starts with like bodily maintenance, how to be clean, how to have a healthy lifestyle, to be regulated, how to develop humility so that we can give our energy and affection and support to those persons who we see to be more qualified than ourselves. And in this way, like, become valuable resources for the re-fertilization of the planet or the re-spiritualization of the planet. Anyway, thank you for that question, John. Yeah, well, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know what's in the desert.
Sorry?
I don't know what's in the desert.
No. Sri Robert says there's life everywhere. But that doesn't mean that if somebody decides they're going to, Sri Prabhupada says Sarvagata means there's life everywhere in the universe. That's why planets were created. Planets were created to support different life forms, so that the jivas who had those bodies could fulfill their material desires and then gradually develop their spiritual desires. But that doesn't mean that somebody can't just destroy like a beautiful forested area and turn it into a lifeless desert. Srila Prabhupada wasn't saying that it's not possible to destroy all the life in the Sahara Desert. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki. Nitai Gaura Premanandi. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki.